John's unseen reaction. The day Paul McCartney walked into his solo session. The air in the New York studio was thick, not just with cigarette smoke and the scent of stale coffee, but with something heavier. A phantom limb of sound, a missing chord. It was 1973. The Beatles were a ghost, their harmony shattered, their legacy a monument to what was and what could never be again. John Lennon, the defiant prophet, sat hunched over a piano, wrestling with demons only he could see. His solo career, a raw, exposed nerve, was his battlefield. Each note a declaration, each lyric a wound. He sought a truth, a brutal honesty that would strip away the layers of myth and expectation. But even in his most solitary moments, the echoes persisted. The ghost of a melody, a shared laugh, a voice that once intertwined with his, inseparable. The city outside hummed with its own relentless rhythm, indifferent to the inner turmoil of a rock god. But within these four walls, a different kind of storm brewed. John, ever the seeker, the provocateur, was crafting his next sonic confession. The tape rolled, capturing every raw edge, every fragile whisper. He believed he was alone, truly alone in this act of creation. A man carving out his own space in a world that still demanded us. But the universe, it seems, has a cruel sense of irony, or perhaps a profound sense of balance. For in the very heart of his solitude, the past was about to walk in, unannounced, uninvited, and utterly unavoidable. John Lennon, a man forged in the fires of Liverpool, now found himself adrift in the concrete canyons of New York. His apartment, a sanctuary of art and introspection, was a world away from the Abbey Road studios where legends were born and broken. Here in the sprawling metropolis, he sought reinvention, a shedding of the skin that had become too tight, too familiar. He was a paradox, a global icon craving anonymity, a fierce individualist haunted by collaboration. His days were a blur of creative bursts and existential angst, fueled by late nights and endless introspection. The studio, a dimly lit cavern of sound, was his confessional. He was working on a track, a searing ballad of regret and defiance, each word a shard of glass. The lyrics, etched in his mind, spoke of betrayal, of paths diverged, of a love that had curdled into something unrecognizable. He played the chords, heavy and deliberate, his voice a guttural roar, then a tender lament. The engineers, accustomed to his mercurial moods, kept their distance, mere witnesses to a private exorcism. John, with his signature round glasses perched on his nose, his hair falling across his face, was a figure of intense, almost frightening focus. He was building a wall, brick by sonic brick, between himself and the past. A fortress of solitude, designed to keep out the very ghosts he couldn't escape. He believed he was finally free, charting a course entirely his own. But the currents of fate, like old friendships, often pull you back to shore. Hey, before we continue with this incredible story, I need to give you an important warning. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube has removed their subscriptions without notice. Just take a quick look at the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any of the exclusive content that's coming up. And while you're there, leave that powerful like that helps me a lot with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who is part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's interact. The studio door, usually locked, usually guarded, creaked open. A mundane sound, yet in that moment, it was a thunderclap. John, lost in the intricate tapestry of his own pain, didn't immediately register it. He was deep in a take, his voice raw, his fingers dancing across the keys. Then a shadow fell across the mixing console. A presence, a familiar scent, perhaps. Or merely the shift in the room's energy. He paused, mid-verse, his hands hovering over the piano. He turned slowly, a flicker of annoyance, then disbelief, crossing his face. Standing there, framed by the harsh fluorescent light of the hallway, was Paul McCartney. Not a ghost, not a memory, but flesh and blood. He stood awkwardly, a faint smile playing on his lips, a guitar case clutched in one hand. The air crackled. The engineers exchanged nervous glances, suddenly aware they were privy to a moment that would ripple through history. John's eyes, usually so expressive, became unreadable. A mask of stone. He said nothing. Paul, equally silent, simply nodded, a gesture that spoke volumes of unspoken history, of shared triumphs and bitter endings. The uninvited chord had struck, resonating with a dissonance that threatened to unravel everything John had built. The past, it seemed, was not content to merely echo. It demanded an audience. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, punctuated only by the whirring of the tape machine. John's gaze, fixed on Paul, was a complex tapestry of emotions: surprise, resentment, a flicker of something akin to nostalgia, quickly suppressed. Paul, ever the diplomat, broke the spell. "Just passing through, John," he offered, his voice softer than the studio's acoustics usually allowed. "Heard you were in town. Thought I'd drop by." A flimsy excuse, a transparent attempt at casualness that fooled no one, especially not John. John finally spoke, his voice low, laced with a dangerous calm. "Passing through or checking up?" The words hung in the air, sharp and accusatory. Paul flinched, a subtle shift in his posture. "No, John. Just wanted to say hello." He gestured vaguely at the studio. "Sounds good what you're doing." A compliment, perhaps, but it felt like a judgment. John pushed away from the piano, rising slowly, his frame taut with tension. "Good? Is that what you think, Paul? Just good?" The old rivalry, the unspoken competition, flared to life in the sterile environment of the recording studio. The engineers held their breath, fearing an explosion. But what transpired was far more insidious than a shouting match. It was a dance of veiled barbs, of loaded silences, of the weight of years of unspoken words pressing down on them both. Each man, a titan in his own right, now reduced to two old friends, or perhaps two old adversaries, circling each other in a cage of their own making. The tension was a palpable force, threatening to shatter the fragile peace of John's solitary world. The air crackled with unspoken accusations, with the ghosts of arguments long past. John, his face a mask of controlled fury, walked towards the mixing console, his back to Paul. He picked up a half-smoked cigarette, lit it with a trembling hand. "You know," he began, his voice barely a whisper, yet cutting through the silence like a razor, "I thought I'd finally escaped the constant comparisons. The endless John and Paul narrative." He turned, his eyes piercing. "But here you are." Again, Paul, his usual composure faltering, shifted his weight. "It's not like that, John. I missed you." The words, simple and raw, seemed to catch John off guard. For a fleeting moment, the mask slipped. A flicker of vulnerability, a shadow of the old bond, crossed his features. But it was quickly replaced by a bitter laugh. "Missed me? Or missed the easy hits? The shared glory?" He gestured wildly around the studio. "This is my work, Paul. My pain. My truth. Not ours." He walked back to the piano, slamming his hands down on the keys, a discordant crash of notes. He began to play the song he had been working on, a raw, unfinished lament. His voice, usually so powerful, now trembled with a barely contained rage, a profound sadness. He sang of betrayal, of loneliness, of the crushing weight of a legacy he couldn't escape. Paul stood frozen, listening. The lyrics, sharp and personal, were clearly aimed at him, at their fractured past. John's eyes, usually so direct, now avoided Paul's, fixed instead on some distant point, lost in the maelstrom of his own creation. This was the climax. Not a physical fight, but a brutal, emotional confrontation, played out through music. The unseen reaction was not a shout, but a song, a confession, a final, desperate attempt to sever the ties that still bound them, even as it revealed how deeply those ties still ran. When the last echoing note faded, the studio was plunged into a profound silence. John slumped over the piano, his chest heaving, spent. The raw emotion of his performance had drained him, leaving him exposed, vulnerable. Paul, who had stood motionless throughout, finally moved. He walked slowly towards John, his face etched with a mixture of pain and understanding. He didn't speak, didn't offer a platitude. Instead, he simply reached out, his hand hovering for a moment, then gently placed it on John's shoulder. It was a gesture of profound weight, a silent acknowledgement of everything that had been said and everything that remained unsaid. John stiffened at the touch, then slowly, almost imperceptibly, relaxed. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge the hand, but he didn't pull away either. The moments stretched, an eternity in the sterile confines of the studio. Paul eventually withdrew his hand, a sigh escaping his lips. He turned, walked to the door, and paused. "It's a powerful song, John," he said, his voice quiet, devoid of judgment. Truly powerful. And then, he was gone. The door clicked shut, leaving John alone once more. But the solitude was different now. It was no longer a fortress, but a space filled with the lingering echo of Paul's presence, of his words, of the weight of that single, gentle touch. The confrontation had not brought resolution, but a new layer of complexity. John had poured out his pain, his anger, his grief. And in doing so, he had, perhaps, opened a wound that could finally begin to heal. The symphony of their lives remained unfinished, but a new, haunting melody had been added. The studio lights dimmed, casting long, distorted shadows across the instruments. John remained at the piano, his fingers idly tracing the keys, but no sound emerged. The encounter had left an indelible mark, a phantom ache in his soul. He had sought to exorcise a ghost, only to find it walking among the living, still capable of stirring the deepest currents within him. The raw emotion of his performance, the brutal honesty of his lyrics, had been a desperate attempt to define himself, to sever the umbilical cord of their shared past. Yet, Paul's quiet departure, his simple, heartfelt words, had left him with something far more complex than victory or defeat. He thought of the years, the laughter, the arguments, the music that had defined a generation. He thought of the dreams they had built, brick by impossible brick, only to watch them crumble. He had wanted to be free, truly free, from the shadow of us. But perhaps true freedom wasn't about erasing the past, but about learning to live with its lingering chords. The tape machine continued its silent rotation, capturing the empty air, the unspoken thoughts, the profound silence that followed the storm. John finally rose, extinguished his cigarette, and walked towards the door. The city outside still hummed, oblivious, but within him a new understanding had begun to form. A realization that some connections, some harmonies are too deeply woven into the fabric of existence to ever truly be broken. They simply change form, becoming a lingering chord, a haunting melody that plays on long after the music has stopped. What truly defines a legacy? Is it the noise of triumph or the quiet echo of a shared, complicated past?